an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Haunting of Hill House, Season 1, Episode 10, Silence Lay Steadily. In this episode, it's the last one, the last installment, and I wasn't sure what to expect because a lot of people didn't like it. I thought it was very well done. So sue me. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Candace for commissioning this episode. Candace is here in the chat, as are a bunch of other people, and some comments with backstory on the house that was discussed apparently outside the actual show. So I'll be going back and reading some of those comments. But I wanted to talk about just generally... when I finished the live watch, I was puzzled at the fact that people didn't like this finale because I think it was really good. And a few people said that folks didn't like how neatly it was all tied up and that it was too happy an ending. And I went and searched for a review of the finale after watching it because I was wondering if somebody would be able to sort of put their finger on what they didn't like in a review, and so I could speak to that specifically. But the only thing that I found was an interview with Mike Flanagan where he mentions that he very nearly left it ambiguous as to whether or not they got out of the house, had the window of the red room in the background when Luke is celebrating his 2 years clean. And he decided it was too cynical and mean-spirited. And that there really wasn't a good reason to do it, other than to just for the sake of it, and he didn't like it. So that had been something they had been toying with doing, and he scrapped it, because he decided that he wanted to go with something more hopeful. And I think that probably lays at the heart of what some people might not have liked about this. There are a lot of people out there that feel if you're telling a horror story, it needs to end on a note that leaves you feeling a little shaken and you're not exactly sure what's real or where you stand, if the thing is going to come back. There's supposed to be a hint of dread remaining. And I don't have a problem with that in theory, but I just don't see the need for it exclusively. There are stories in which that is the message you're trying to go for, is just this never ends. There's no escape, But it really felt to me, this is an extremely personal story about a specific group of people. And to end it with, and then they were trapped there forever, it feels really, I've been talking about the symbolism behind Nell being haunted by the bent neck lady, and they're feeling like there's an inevitability to it, you just never escape your own patterns and you create your own futures, the very things you fear. And that felt pretty bleak, and it should. I mean, that's the middle of the season when things are at their worst. Well, in some ways. And I just don't see the need to stick with that kind of bleakness right up until the end. I think that the fact that Hill House remains standing is enough. That isn't over. There's no cleansing of the ghosts entirely. And I am fine with that because that's part of it. For me, that feels like we're very on theme. The whole point of this show was coping with your own demons, the wrongs done to you by others, the wrongs you have done that you choose to ignore. And you don't get to just obliterate the things that you don't want to look at or deal with. And they are all mixed up with good stuff. which can make it very complicated. So, in my opinion, leaving Hill House standing, even though part of it is horrifying, because there is some beauty there still, is like how we have to deal with our own pasts and histories. You know, we may have a lot of trauma, and may have been done wrong by a lot of people. But many folks, given the chance to just completely erase their memory, would not choose to do that. And for me, that's sort of where Hill House comes down, is like it's a symbol of the history of this family. And you can't just do away with it all. As much as you think you may want to, as much as that might seem like the solution, it isn't fair to you or anyone else who might have been involved in whatever went down. And I liked that line that Mr. Dudley says to Hugh. There are a lot of beautiful and precious things here, and a lot of them don't belong to you. And I think that kind of says it all, you know? And so I am surprised that people who liked the show up until, you know, maybe the finale or a couple episodes before, I feel like they must have been kind of missing the point, in my opinion. You know, I'm always fascinated by this whenever I run into somebody who had a very similar reaction initially to a property, and then our opinions diverge, and sort of zeroing in on exactly what it was that they like that I didn't, or vice versa. And oftentimes it comes down to like personal baggage that we bring to the material and our interpretations of what's happening in front of us, which are always going to be based in our own baggage. There's just no avoiding that. And sometimes it can really reveal a lot about the person and where they're coming from, you know? So I just wanted to mention this off the top because, like I said, I sort of went into the finale a little worried because I had seen a fair number of people who I overall trust their opinions in general, who really didn't like it. So I went in not certain how I was going to feel. If I hadn't seen that people were worried that they hadn't liked it, I probably would have gone into the finale with fairly high expectations because the show has been so good so far that I was just willing to trust this director. But in some ways, I think going into it with my uncertainty was good because I think that added a like sort of zest of just sort of that waiting for like the thing that's wrong that fucks it all up and then it never comes. It sort of makes you enjoy everything a little bit more, if that makes sense. So yeah, I just personally, I think that this story isn't meant to just be a horror story. And that is why it doesn't end the way a horror story is expected to end, because it doesn't fit completely into that little niche, you know? So yeah, and Patrick in the chat just said, gotta respect directorial choices that are actually meaningful and not just for the cheap thrill of it. Exactly. Like, I can understand the temptation to make it ambiguous, whether they got out of the house. But if there's not a really intense meaning to that, if there isn't something that you're trying to say, then why do that? You know, it's exactly, cheap is the exact word. And if you were a different type of director, maybe what you would be trying to say is that families can't escape this shit and it will eat you all alive and you just can't get out of it. But that's not what he was trying to say. So he didn't do that. And I think that's fair. Candace says the juxtaposition of Luke and Nellie in the end with them escaping the cycle was so important in my opinion. I mean, Luke learned how to escape and fight for himself. Nellie didn't, but she helped her family out. Yeah. And I love your interpretation of the symbolism. And yeah, we see that Hill House may continue to exist for hundreds of years still with 3 Cranes and three Dudleys. So it's not all a happy ending, by the by. And it's a testament to the trauma of these lives that cannot be erased. Yeah, 4 Dudleys. I was about to say, but Patrick corrected himself. Yeah, so I just really... The fact that this ends the way that it does... Anybody saying that, like, this was too happy an ending, I mean... They all had to live their lives in fear and uncertainty and denial. One of their sisters committed suicide, and their mother had died, and their father winds up sacrificing himself. That does not read as an unmitigated happy ending. So I really just, folks who wanted it to be darker than that, I gotta ask you why. And maybe, you know, that's your thing that you need to look at. So I'm going to rewind a bit and read some of Ashley's comments. She says, okay, so I went over to the count to 7 material and I refreshed my memory on what exactly was going on with that user. They aren't Mike Flanagan, but they're another writer on the show who has never been publicly identified. This was confirmed by another writer on the show, the Dalek Emperor, who is also a writer on No Sleep. There was tones of backstory for the Hills, I think kind of similar to the original inhabitants of Bly Manor. It became too expensive to film, so they cut it. Those posts were all Hill backstory and is considered semi-canon. There is one inconsistency. In the show, Jacqueline is Hazel's daughter. In the original plans, she was Poppy's daughter. Which one is Jacqueline? I don't remember if we have... And Hazel is Poppy's mother or mother-in-law. Hazel is Poppy's sister-in-law. Okay. So this whole thing, just for me, the way that it all wrapped up, I have to admit, guys, I was so worried that Luke was going to die. And I really thought he had. I mean, of course we think he had. I just would have been so devastated. And if he had died, I wouldn't even have been angry at the writing or anything. It would have felt fair. It would have felt like, well, okay, I mean, but I would have been super sad about it. And I'm really, really glad that he makes it out, y'all. And on the same page as the interview with Mike Flanagan, there was like a clip of an interview with him, and I watched it, and I thought he was going to have a Scottish accent like he does on Bly Manor, but evidently that is not his real accent either. So yeah, this guy is just like Mr. Accent all over the fucking place. So we're going to start at the beginning here. The way that this begins is a confirmation of like the exact scene that I painted in the previous episode, which I did not expect to see. But what we get is Shirley running up the stairs, allegedly with the key to the red room, her and Nell trying it out on the door, shaking the handle, trying to get it open. And then we cut to the inside and we see Theo dancing, and it does turn out to be the red room, and it does turn out that the house keeps her from seeing that there is somebody outside the door. All of the things that I said is exactly how it works. I just thought that that was going to be a theory. I did not think that we were going to explicitly be shown that that is how it works. And I love it. You know, like I could see me saying it on the show is one thing. I go through these episode by episode. If I were watching this, like binging it, I don't think I would have given myself the time to formulate that theory and understand. So the show explicitly giving us that scene just seems necessary to me. And I really liked it. And it also makes it so much creepier, you know, to know that Theo is in there and she's wondering what the hell's going on, and she has no idea where she is. She can't see that they're out. That's how effective the house is at disconnecting each of these family members from one another. And that's really the key here, is that the house alleges that it's trying to keep everyone together. But what it is actually attempting to do is separate everybody from one another, because if they are too close-knit, they aren't going to be digestible. Basically, it's like trying to take a bite out of a whole turkey instead of cutting your turkey into nice little pieces, one for each plate. One of them is just more practical than the other. And by the time they all wind up in the red room, they have all been partially digested, is the sort of way that Nellie frames it later on. So it makes sense that by then they're like, yeah, all of you can come in here. Like, this seems like that's the only way that I'm going to make this happen, so may as well. Let's see. Candace says, people get lured in and touched by a ghost. There's just unconscious people laying around the house. Yeah, so this scene, I was just very pleased and delighted to have that confirmed. And then we cut to a scene with Steve typing up the sequel novel to The Haunting of Hill House. I am home, and stopped in wonder at the thought. I am home. And I love the little bits of clues that we get that this is not real. There's first the significance of the color scheme, which we have seen throughout the show, but I didn't realize like exactly what was happening there because the red room significance wasn't revealed yet. So like we knew the red room was going to wind up being extremely important, but I didn't really connect the dots. And Nellie, in her burial outfit, I was about to say uniform, she's dressed in red. She's the only person in the entire scene dressed in red. Everybody else is in grays and blues and blacks. And then here we have Steve, and he is like typing up in a red cardigan. The rest of the house is all in grays and blues. He goes to open the fridge, and there is a red ring lit up on his refrigerator to warn him that the filter is broken. And then in the fridge is like a bunch of tomatoes, and it's out of focus, but still it's a like splash of bright red. All of these things to sort of signal to you what this is. And his wife comes in, and she's pregnant. And all of this was really, like, for me, the major giveaway that they're reconciled. She's pregnant, which either means that he agreed to, like, a surrogate, like, pregnancy, or would you be... She wouldn't be a surrogate because she wants to keep the baby, but they got a sperm donor because he's not, wanting to use his own tainted sperm, or he reversed his vasectomy. And also that all of this time has passed since they, came home, and we're going to hear this retroactively, or this isn't real. And it was much easier to think this wasn't real. Also, the lighting in this scene is really warm, and it flies in the face of the color palette of the rest of the show in those terms. It is grays and blacks and blues mostly, yes, but it's still got like warm orangey sunlight filtering through. And again, I just didn't trust it because it looks too happy. So... this whole thing is just so amazing because as somebody who really hated Steve, still hates him. Let's be honest. There's a whole thing where he like talks to his wife at the end of the episode and tries to get her forgiveness. And frankly, it did not amount to much for me. I didn't find it to be moving. I wouldn't have like... She apparently, this is enough for her to forgive him, but I just didn't feel like he was apologizing. Actually, it felt like much more of a vague explanation, and it's not like he can actually tell her what happened at the house, but at least actually apologizing for gaslighting her for literal years. I don't know. The whole thing with him and Shirley, both of them, it just was like the show wanted us so much to sympathize with them that it forgot they were trying to right a wrong they had done to someone. So it just was extremely indulgent to both of them. And at this point, I'm on their side already. I don't need to be shown they're begging for their, like, significant other's support. I need to see them taking some sincere responsibility, because that's what has been lacking for the both of them. It's not like they didn't have a partner who had been supportive up until the fact that they found out that, you know, like, so I just hated the fact that Shirley's whole thing too started off with her being like, I need you to hold my hand and love me hard because this is going, and I was just like, oh my God, just fucking tell him and stop making all of this about you. This isn't even about you. There's a part of me that almost wishes Shirley had just kept it to herself, to be honest, because there's a point at which I think that if you have cheated and you really do regret it and you really are just like completely changed after that and really never intend to do that again and regret it every day, I don't know that it's best for your partner to know about it. And this is one of those like controversial opinions, but there are times where I think a confession is for the perpetrator to feel better and not actually for the good of the relationship. Yeah, you're being eaten alive by guilt. Maybe that's exactly what you deserve. You know, maybe that's your punishment. And you have to deal with the fact that you deserve to feel extremely guilty. But, you know, I can understand why people think you can't have a healthy relationship without telling somebody the complete truth. In a lot of ways, I do think that's true too. They're both like conflicting sort of opinions in my mind. But, you know, it's just the kind of thing where with Shirley, it felt like we don't get to see her actually tell him the thing that she did. We just see her begging him to like stand by her after she completely turned her back on him and wasn't willing to even entertain a conversation. And that was partially what I really wanted, was a conversation between them where she admitted, I'm going to need you to do for me something that I was not willing to do for you. And I recognize that that's incredibly hypocritical, and I am fucked up, and I apologize, and I want to do better, and I will listen and be willing to communicate in the future because I recognize now how unfair I was being. But we don't get that. We just get this like, please love me, I'm going to do this thing. And then it cuts away before that even happens. And I was like, I guess this doesn't feel like responsibility, but fine. Let's see. Patrick says Steve's speech wasn't very redemptive. Shirley's was a bit more sincere. Yeah, don't agree. Like, it's not even that they were either of them insincere. It just neither of them felt like they got to the point. Ashley says, with this rewatch, I tried to make a concerted effort to empathize with him, and for the most part, no, he's just a bit of a dick. Yup. Steve and Snape are still over party. Are still over party. What does that mean? I don't know that saying. Nancy says telling Kevin was for her, not him. Yeah. And Candace says it was so obvious it wasn't about him at all. Even the cheating wasn't about Kevin. None of it was. So her apology being about him loving her was also about her. Oh, girl, leave him out of it. Yeah. That's kind of why I felt like I didn't want her to necessarily tell him. Her looking at it and keeping that grace to herself, that she recognizes we all have shit we're not proud of, and maybe letting that influence the way that she deals with other people. That would be what I would like to see. But it's also really difficult to like keep that in, get that across that somebody has transformed in that way in, you know, the 30 seconds that we see of how she decides to handle things going forward. So it's just one of those where I just needed her to acknowledge it. I wanted her to see it. And that would be enough. Like her realizing that the reaction that she had to even thinking that Theo was like gonna be fucking Kevin, that she was projecting her own shame onto them, you know? And also, just for the record, I want to register my smugness with the fact that it wasn't a ghost. It was just a memory, and that it was over an affair, because that was the vibe I started to get. And I was like, I don't know if the show is going to play with that sort of thing. And it turns out, yeah, they will, which is kind of fun. I really like the fact that in this show, ghosts have been allowed to be a lot of things. There are literal ghosts, you know, spirits remaining. There are the ghosts that are guilt and our past actions haunting us. There are ghosts that actually turn out to be real people who are not allowed to be out in the world to the point that somebody else thinks that they are a made-up imaginary friend. And there are ghosts that, like with Hugh imagining that his wife is there, it truly is a coping mechanism, and she wasn't even a real apparition that was like appearing to him. He created her. That's fun. It makes it a lot more sort of loosey-goosey with what we can interpret in each scene. It gives the word ghost a lot more like sort of symbolic meaning. It leaves room in the story for the kinds of curveballs that we've wound up getting. And I think that, you know, ghosts are often meant to represent that exact sort of thing. You know, being haunted has a lot of meanings. So, Candace says, Natasha, your face was so pricelessly smug. I can't help it, guys. I can be really smug. It's not one of my better qualities. And I try to just acknowledge it when it's happening. Because I've been like sort of doing should I just like try and act like I'm not feeling that way? And I'm like, I don't think I can. I don't think I'm that good an actor. I don't think I can pull that off. I just have to acknowledge it and then just move it right along, you know? So, let's see. Ashley says, see, this is the only thing that would make me think they are still in the room because it felt like it being the room giving them everything they want without consequences. Well, Ashley, see, that's the thing is that we don't see how those conversations wind up going. With Steve, you really do get the impression that it seems like when she gets up and walks over to him that she has forgiven him. We don't see how things go with Shirley. We really just get the fact that he squeezes her hand harder, I guess, as, you know, it's meant to signal that he will be by her side. But I do see what you mean. Ariel says, blank is over party is a common hashtag for when people do messed up stuff and we cancel them. Huh. I never heard that before. Wild. Yeah, I've never heard that. So, yeah, Patrick was still a dick, though, indeed. So this moment, like I was started to say, but then got completely sucked into the end of the episode. This moment where Steve is working on writing this, and his wife begins to explain to him why he doesn't remember any of this stuff happening, is truly one of the more fucking amazing monologues on this show. In a show filled with truly outstanding monologues. I mean, I feel like once per episode, there is a monologue that just makes me go, oh my God, wow. And this fucking... It's everything that you want to say to Steve. It's really wild because you know that it's not real by this point. Like, you're figuring it out. And so you know it's the house talking to Steve. And what is interesting to me is that the house, if we're, you know, going to sort of go with the description of it that we get from Mrs. Dudley, which is that the house feeds on people and is greedy and stupid and just eats. The house is sort of calling Stephen the same thing. It's like a pot kettle situation. And I, for one, am 100% here for it because it felt right to me. I just... So yeah, he tells her, I don't remember us reconciling. I don't remember what happened inside the room. I don't remember anything that happened. And I don't remember you telling me that you got pregnant or coming back to California or anything. And she takes a deep breath and says, well, of course you don't, because you haven't written it yet. I mean, is anything real before you write it, Steve? The things you write about are real. The people, their feelings, their pain is real. But not to you, is it? Not until you chew it up and you digest it and you shit it out onto a piece of paper. And even then, it's a pale imitation at best. You take other people's lives and love and loss and pain and you eat it, Steve. You are an eater. You eat it and you shit it out, and then and only then is it real for you. Normal people's lives are flesh and blood and muscle and bone, but not yours, darling. Oh no, your life is plastic. You are a plastic parasite, a plastic hack, aren't you, honey? So, of course, you don't remember how you healed our marriage or made our baby because you haven't really seen it, have you? You haven't shat it out in prose. I was always a supporting player in your story, if we're honest. I would feed you and fuck you and pay the bills while you squinted over some novel that no one was going to read or publish. But I paid you to write them, didn't I? I picked up the check for your dreams, and I said goodbye to mine. And not even that was enough. No, don't lie to me, honey. I wasn't real. If I was real, you never would have walked out that door. But I wasn't. And you did. And now, this little one, and she pulls her shirt up and you can see the black spreading through her veins. She won't be real either. I swear to God, you guys, this was the most effective read I've ever seen in my life. Holy mother of God, what an opening. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. The house is just like, oh, it takes one to know one. Yeah, we just consume. I totally see that in you. So, I clocked that shit. God damn. Harsh. Oh, that is good shit. So, all of a sudden, her stomach continues to expand. And she says, if she eats me from the inside, I burst like a blister, will you lose your mind like your mother? And she leans back and turns into this decayed corpse. And all of a sudden he hears his name and he turns and Nell is sitting next to him, and it's not creepy, corpsey Nell. It's Nell looking not great, but nevertheless, living flesh looking Nell. And she reaches out and touches him on the head, and he wakes up. And it is just really good, you guys. It's so good. The monologue of reading Steve is the consolation prize for having to pretend he's redeemed, says Nancy. You know what? That seems fair. It's almost like the house is comparing Steve to its... Exactly. Ashley says, see, I feel like the vast majority of viewers hate Lee, and I can't really do that. Most of what we see of her is before we learn just what Steve did, and I feel like this monologue, which isn't even real, Lee, is also held against her and used to label her as a bitch. Well, let's be perfectly honest. People are going to hate the woman every time. Anytime that there is a male lead... And I put lead with quotes around it because I really don't even think Steve is genuinely the lead, but let's say he is. And there is a female partner who does not agree with what he is doing. She's always hated. There's just no avoiding it. So what can you do? Everybody who dislikes her is absolutely wrong, completely, deeply incorrect, and really needs to just sit down and actually look at the facts here. Because I guarantee... Were they married to somebody who lied to them for years and gaslit them and pretended to try and conceive when they actively were working against that the entire time? They would fucking feel a way about it. But people don't like to actually see things from the woman's point of view. You can listen to the whole Breaking Bad series to hear us quietly cheering Skylar White on the entire time in disbelief at the fact that anybody thought she was the unreasonable one, you know, like it's just always the way. And Nancy says, I feel like the monologue is the thing that gives her any depth. Like his guilt about her getting the short end of the stick is the only way we know much that was the case. Oh my God, Ariel just said Skylar. This is the same time I was. Yeah, I think that the fact that she footed the bill for his dreams and gave hers up is a really nice extra little bit of detail that we didn't know. I don't know what I thought was going on, but I guess I assumed that Steve was working like a regular job and trying to write at the same time. And I didn't realize that she was basically like paying for everything while he hopefully got somewhere with what he was doing. And it makes a little bit more sense in a way, knowing that he was in that position, that he would decide to sell his family's story and just totally like betray everybody's trust. Because as somebody who has been the spouse that's working on a dream while their partner is actually paying the bills, it's a heavy burden to know that you're not bringing anything to the table at the moment. You know, I do a lot around the house. At this point, I am making around what I need to, like, kind of, in order to help contribute to the household. But because we now have the wedding coming up, so much is going to that. But I have tried to compensate by doing a lot around the house and trying to take on labor in that direction, because I feel extremely guilty about the fact that I don't pay the mortgage. I don't pay the electric bill, you know? And I can understand if you have felt like you keep letting your spouse down, to eventually compromise and be like, okay, you know what? I really just want to offer something to them for all of this like faith they've put in me. I would like to have something to fucking show for it. And I can't help but understand that, you know? And that was a big reason between me and Brendan why things didn't work out between us, because his resentment toward me in the end, with the fact that I was not working a full-time job, he just couldn't handle that. And it was really, I was full of resentment because when I did work full-time, I also was expected to keep the entire household going. And that felt incredibly unfair to me. So, you know, there was just no winning. And I just was like, you know what, then I'm out. Amongst other things. But yeah, it's an incredible privilege to have a partner who will foot the bill and help you to get yourself off the ground when you have a dream. But there is a price to pay for that, and you don't necessarily succeed with your dream. So sometimes it feels like you have just let somebody pour their money down a drain for years, and it can be really like demoralizing. So anyway, I just found that particularly interesting that was like sort of dropped in there, and it isn't something that Steve has talked about very much, and it wouldn't be something that we would maybe know if we weren't getting this from her lips, whether or not it's really her. You know, I have a feeling that were we to talk to her in life, the fact that he was gaslighting her and she was paying all the bills, that is quite a fucking combination, you know, like, yeah, whole other situation. So he wakes up and he is in the red room covered in black mold. It's super gross. I really love the texture of it too. It's very clear. This is not just paint. They have sprayed some sort of like, it almost looks like black cotton or black paint mixed with like cotton that they have like splattered against the wall. It is so gross. And Luke is on the floor with a fucking needle in his arm. And I was like, did they get him to OD? Like, I think it's rat poison, right? It's not meant to be heroin. It's actual poison. I'm going to say this. I really hope that it was just poison. Because it just, you know, he winds up with his 2 years. And so we know that it does work out and he does manage to like stay clean. But I have to assume that it would be a lot harder to get those 2 years if the house managed to get you high one last time after you've had 90 days, you know? So if it just tried to kill him with rat poison, for all I know, maybe that memory of it being poison helped him to stay clean. Let's see. Nancy says, yeah, the scene where Steve was planning to help pay for Luke's rehab, and then they found out how much it was going to cost, and him looking embarrassed and dejected that he couldn't was another hint at him switching from his historical novels to the ghost stories that actually sell. Yeah. Yeah, that was that was one of the moments, again, where I was just like, okay, I'm starting to get it, you know? Like, doing things for money, it gets a rap as being incredibly selfish because we just don't like admitting you need money to live a stable life, because we just try to pretend that capitalism is great while also acting like it's not the thing. It's a bizarre relationship that we've got, and it's partially been fed to us by the very people who are trying to trick us into thinking that wanting money is selfish. You know, there's nothing wrong with wanting money. It's that there comes a point where you have enough and, you know, time to fucking just live your life. So, okay. He begins to work on Luke, trying to bring him back to consciousness. And then we go into Luke's vision. And in his vision, he's on the phone, he's talking to Steve. And I was wondering what we were seeing here, because, you know, with Steve's vision, we're in a completely different place. It's out of nowhere. It genuinely feels like, wait, what? But with Luke, this is something that we've seen before. So then, what is her name? She comes up to him, and it turns out that she went to go get a hotel room. And she didn't just run off with the money. She actually is intending to do what they said. And she's leading him in, and the hint that we get in this scene, which I noticed, again, taupes, blues, everything is very sort of neutral. And then you see that he is wearing red Converse sneakers, and he didn't have shoes on earlier in the scene. And you can assume that, oh yeah, she had shoes for him that she gave him. I mean, even if she did, they just happen to be red. That's like really interesting, you know? So she reminds him, no, I didn't run off. I got us this room and then met you at the payphone, remember? And he has like this, oh, yeah. And there is something particularly pitiful to me with all of these, when the visions are trying to get them to see that this is no, what I'm saying happened. Don't you remember? And the person goes, oh, right. Yes. Watching them starting to fall for it is literally painful. I swear to God, it's just so, watching somebody being lied to like this and trust the person who is lying to them. It's so hard to watch, and it makes my skin itch. Like, I just fucking hate it so much. So then she says, I have something for us. And she pulls out the little balloon full of heroin one last time just to get well before we get clean. And to his credit, Luke says no. He says no. And says, I'm 90 days clean, 92, actually. And I was so proud of him. I really, really was. Just like this is such a delicate situation. And he is so vulnerable right now. And anybody caving in this moment, I would have my sympathy. He is talking to somebody that he really believes he can trust. He is in a safe place where it feels like he could get high without it being dangerous for him right now. And the person that is telling him that it's fine is somebody that he had been looking up to and respecting. So he could give it a little bit of credence. Like, all of this is just so perfectly set up to get him to crack, and he doesn't. And it's just so beautiful to watch. And this is when she says, you're never really clean. Never really clean. You can collect all the chips you want, but you have an appointment with that needle. It's going to be there. And he's like struggling against this, her telling him that it's absolutely inevitable. And as he is saying no, she is tying off her own arm to shoot up. And she is telling him what he's probably thinking happened to her. That she took the money, that she went and got high, OD'd in an alley somewhere, and was being eaten by rats. And then she loads up. He says no. And she says, you already did. And he looks down, and there's a needle in his arm already. And you see him freak out, which just, I think, gives lie to the fact that it's like obviously partially a physical reaction he's having. But I love the fact that, again, were he to be like, all right, you know what, fine, I'm going to lay back and enjoy this. It would be understandable where they'd fall into that, but he doesn't. And then here we go with her eyes turning to jelly. It's the worst fucking thing. I hated this so much, you guys. So then we go to Shirley's thing. I won't get into Shirley's too much because we already know what was going on there. I've talked about it, but just the fact that she had an affair and then buried it. And it was something that she wasn't proud of, but she was still willing to be incredibly self-righteous with everyone else. And with Shirley, she is the one in red in that scene. And the guy had like ordered a drink for her. He acts surprised that she's married, but then as it turns out, he is also married. And in this scene, she says no. And he comes back and says, that's not how it went, though, is it? And I just really, really liked the way this was shown and how understandable they made it, not excusing it, but the fact that she was so overwhelmed and tired. And with her, again, the theme of hunger in this show, of the world being hungry, comes back over and over again. With Luke, that hunger is an addiction. With Theo, that hunger seems to be for like connection, but that she's so also afraid of it, at the same time. And I think with Shirley, the hunger is her life, having a business, having 2 children, and feeling like all of the energy is constantly being pulled out of her, and she never has anything left for herself. And that is like how he describes it when he's repeating back to her how she's feeling. And she also says that her life had gotten really loud. So yeah, this theme, it makes a lot of sense. I think that hungry is a really great descriptor for a lot of these sorts of feelings of being put through a ringer, And it's also, not to get off topic, but in the Cradle series, which I'll be covering right after this, hunger is a recurring theme in that as well, in a very different way. And I find it a very effective, evocative word. It just can mean a lot of things. So then we go to Theo's. Oh, right. I forgot about Shirley going to her own funeral. And she's dressed in red there. And Kevin and the man that had led her to see her mother, they both have like a red rose and tie, all of this. And then she sits up and begins tearing at her own face. And the whole thing is supposed to be, yeah, you made yourself like seem presentable, but really underneath you're a fucking disaster. And so that's pretty good. I thought that was effective. It's horrible to watch her peel her own skin off. I hated it, but well done. And then we have Theo, and she is in bed with the girl. God, I can't remember her name. Sorry, everybody. The other girl's name was Joey, which everybody told me, but I didn't see until after I had even finished talking about Luke. And Theo is recalling her mother spanking her because she put a rock through the greenhouse roof. And it was something that her mother had like designed and was presenting to a client. And Theo says, I learned so much about my mother that day. But I also learned something about myself, and I remembered the lovely crash. And after thinking about it very seriously, I went out and did it again. And that's very interesting to me. This is one of the ones that's a little bit more puzzling for me in terms of the meaning. Because it's like she's searching for sensation. Like the crash and just the overall sound of it being so satisfying and wanting more of that. That is kind of what I meant when I was saying it feels like her hunger is for a connection of some kind. And that even though she got hit, she went out and did it again. And I couldn't, like, she says that she thought about it very carefully and like weighed it. And I'm like, is this meant to be that she is trying to see if her mother will spank her again? Or is it that I think it's meant to be that the crash was so satisfying. And because of her monologue juxtaposed against Trish, thank you, Nancy. Trish's monologue is about how guilt and fear are sisters. And she's describing the guy who walled himself up in the house and how he like did it allegedly to try and escape from the guilt and fear. But it turned out that there was room in there enough for both of them anyway. And he wound up like trapped in there with them. And that in trying to keep them out, he wound up ensuring that he had nowhere to go and was trapped with them. I didn't really understand the relationship between what they were each saying. You know, like each of the monologues in these sort of visions that they are having, they feel like they sort of go with what was previously happening, but the one from Trish doesn't totally work for me in that way. Like, I get that she's sort of meant to be comparing what that guy did with what Theo did, that Theo tried so hard to keep the world out that she wound up trapping herself with her own guilt and fear. I get that in general, but I don't understand what her story about the greenhouse has to do with those things, because there doesn't seem to be guilt or fear associated, really. It seems like she didn't feel guilty and she went out and did it again, and she isn't even sorry now, is the vibe that you get. There didn't seem to be any real fear with the fact that she got spanked. It was just sort of a thoughtful, like, even my mother could be pushed to that point, but she never did do it again, you know? I don't know. I just didn't really get this. If you guys have any theories on it, I would be interested. But yeah, finally, Trish says, like, just lay back and enjoy as she is about to go down on Theo. And then all of a sudden, all of these hands that are very creepy and corpse-like begin to wrap around her face and her neck. And it looks like she's going to maybe either be torn apart or just overwhelmed. It might be that she's just like picking up sensory stuff, but I don't think so, because part of the point of this scene is that she doesn't have that sensory power anymore because she's normal in this vision. But in any case, she looks up and she sees Nellie standing there with her hand out and reaches out. And I thought that that was kind of significant, that with Nellie in other scenes, she comes up to everybody and sort of taps them on the head to pull them out. But with Theo, she can't tap her on the head. She holds her hand out. But Theo has to reach out and meet her halfway, which I thought was significant almost like, I've been here the whole time, but I can't just do everything. You have to be willing, and I thought that felt significant to me. I don't know. Might be reading too much into it. So she wakes up. She sees Luke on the floor. There's a moment where everybody seems pretty certain Luke is dead. And then we see Luke, and he is in the red room, but it looks white now. And this is a really good scene. Luke is in this suit, first of all, and looks amazing. He looks so good, you guys. He is just fine as hell. I'm really glad that he is in this show, because the guy who plays Steve, I tend to find extremely attractive in most things he's in. But his personality sucks so bad in this show that I would have been very disappointed to have nobody that I could really get into on being hot. And thank you, everybody who cast this, for giving me Luke. I appreciate it. That was a gift. So he wakes up in the room with his mother, and it's odd because the Nellie that's sitting at the table waiting for him, along with Abigail, Nellie is a baby. She's the baby Nellie. But he's grown. And the baby Nellie is aware that shit ain't right. And as his mother is inviting him to the table, and she's telling this monologue that's also from the book with Nell's journey to Hill House. As he's approaching the table, baby Nellie keeps telling him, "Oh, no, don't. Go. Don't. Just go." And this is, what Nellie appeared to him at the foot of his bed saying, "Go." And it's interesting, now that we know that so many events were not happening in order, was that her yelling at him to go from the red room and she just accidentally wound up in the wrong spot when she said it, So this is the point where he really begins to realize that this is not what he wanted. And what sort of makes him nervous, because he seems to be falling for it for a second. But what makes him nervous is he looks up and they're all wearing bowler hats, and she's holding up a bowler hat for him specifically. And he stands up and sort of, he doesn't back away physically, but his body language is in retreat, if that makes sense. It's clearly this that has pushed it over into, oh, this isn't right. And I really loved seeing him, both listening to his gut that this isn't okay, and seeing Nellie fighting for him. It's too late for her. She got, but she can see that he still has a chance to get out of here. And he's trying to say, "I'm sorry" to his mother, and she says, "It was not your fault. Never once. It was the world. You were perfect." And he's like, "No, I wasn't, and I'm not." And finally, she is telling him, "You want to be in here." "No, I don't. I don't think I do." And she insists, "You've been knocking on that door for years and years. We could hear you knocking louder all the time. And finally, here you are. Please." And as he is backing away, he hits the wall. The window is right behind him. And then suddenly Nellie appears next to him, grabs him by the hand, and pulls him out. And this is when we see Nellie in person in the red room. And it's really excellent because they have her having a conversation with them before they begin the conversation. So all of the things that she says in reply to them later are things that they just heard her say a second ago, but it just didn't line up. It was like two audio tracks, like when I'm editing a podcast, and I just had one slightly ahead, and the person was talking to themselves. And eventually it begins to sync up, and that's when everybody begins to pay attention because they realize, oh, okay, we thought you were just talking without being able to tell we were here, but now were in the same place. And she is explaining that she always thought time was laid out like dominoes. And all of our moments were lined up and they fell into one another, tipping over, and like between the beginning and the end. And now I realize that our moments are falling all around us like rain or snow or confetti. And that is such a wild thought, you know? And I kind of like in some ways that the fact that she was appearing to herself as her dead bent neck lady doesn't turn out to necessarily be like the symbolic, oh, you just create your own problems thing that I thought. It seems to more be like time be fucked up. Just never know, you know, which that's like less easy for me to handle because I don't have any control in that scenario, but also it's sort of comforting in that it's not meant to just be, well, nothing you do matters, you know, which I appreciate because nobody wants to hear that. And she explains to all of them how they've been in this room many times and none of them ever knew. And talks about how this house has this room as its stomach. And it would present us with places where we would stay still and quiet so that it could easily digest us. And so each of us got our own special place that we could come. And she comes and kneels next to Luke. And she tells him, he says, I don't know how to do this without you. And she says, I'll tell you a secret. There is no without. I am not gone. I am in so many pieces sprinkled on your life like new snow. And I loved that line. That idea of somebody just being, the whole idea is of, I will always be with you sounds so corny. And it does because like that particular phrasing of that line is just so overdone. But saying like pieces of you are scattered through someone's life, I think is really beautiful. And getting verklempt over here. I've been planning a wedding, as you all know. And I saw this tradition that somebody did where they got large photos of people who had died that they wanted to be there on their day. And they put each of them in a frame and put each frame in a chair for the ceremony. So it was like they were there. And I'm definitely doing that, first of all. But it did get me to thinking how, like, it can, you know, not being able to speak to somebody and talk with them, hug them, it feels like they're gone. But every single day, something about that person will come to mind. Or something that they gave you, you'll see because it's out in some part of your house. Or something you do. You will do because they taught you to do this that way. Or they taught you that this thing was important. And it stuck. And that's them being there. You know? Just, life is very lovely, but it's also really difficult to be okay with sometimes. So, what we get next is the scene with Hugh. And we are already aware that something is up because when Shirley and Theo got there, we saw Hugh, he tried to grab the door of the red room. And blackness overtook him and he went down. It was like physically did something to him. And he collapsed, and when he wakes up, he's reaching for his heart medicine. And he opens the bottle and takes one. And I was like, oh my God, I would not put a thing in my mouth in this fucking house. Like, you just don't know. And then there's a pair of feet there. And I'm going to go over time, but it's just going to have to, it's just what's going to have to happen. I'm already 5 minutes over. He looks down and fucking Poppy's feet are here. And she's telling him about this family, the Groton family, which I don't know if this is something that I missed. Is this supposed to just be like a weird nursery rhyme? Because, like, God knows some of them are very violent. I don't know what this is, but she's talking about this dude who murdered all of these family members, including, like, his child, and leans toward him, and then suddenly Olivia is there, telling Poppy to back the fuck off. And Olivia is actual Olivia. Still not okay, Olivia. This was so sad because the fact that she tells Poppy to back the fuck up, I was hoping was an indication that she understood that Poppy had lied to her and that she'd been taken for a ride. But evidently not. It seems that Olivia has like gotten to the point that she does not like Poppy, but she still thinks that what she was told about keeping her children safe is true. And she argues with him about the safety of their kids and whether or not to open the room, until eventually he makes a deal with her that he will stay if he is allowed to let them out. And the next thing we know, he's opening the door. They are helping Luke out. And there's a moment where Luke sort of stumbles, and Steve looks at something and really seems like freaked out. They continue on. And at this point, I was like, not sure what Steve had seen. I didn't notice him looking specifically where he was. But I kind of thought, is he just going to go back inside and kill himself? Or is he dead already? I couldn't tell. And because this show has decided that ghosts can touch things the way that a normal person could, anybody at any point could be a ghost because they all seem like regular people in the moment. And they get Luke into the car. Theo and Shirley go to the hospital, and Luke stays behind. And he clearly knows what's happening here. And he gets to see that final night and everything that went down. Everything that he has always wanted to know that his father wouldn't tell him. And I love when Hugh was talking to Olivia and he tells her, I had my arms spread holding the door closed to keep the monsters out, and I didn't have any arms for the kids. I thought that was such a great summary of like what his life has been like for the past 20 something years, you know? It just really, there is a temptation to see him as just this negligent father, but in a way he was doing what he thought had to be done. So Steve sees his father coming home, absolutely panicking and freaking out as he finds Olivia. The Dudleys coming in and looking for their daughter, and him realizing who the little girl is in the red room. And eventually, it's really kind of beautiful in its way. The Dudleys are not angry because they fucking know exactly what happened. So they don't blame him. They don't blame Olivia. They don't feel the need to hold anybody responsible. There's almost an inevitability here. And it turns out nobody even knew they had a child. That was how much they kept her from the world. So they can bury her by their home and nobody will know. And as they're talking about this, Abigail's ghost walks up to the door, and it turns out that Mrs. Dudley can hold her hand and touch her. And when Hugh very understandably says, I am going to burn this motherfucker into the ground, she is like, oh my God, please don't. Like, my daughter is here. I can see and touch her here. Please don't. And this is when Mr. Dudley is like, not everything here belongs to you. And he has some compassion that I don't know that I would have had. I like to think so, but it does seem so dangerous to leave the place, up at all. And later on, we see Mr. Dudley and Mrs. Dudley at a ripe old age, and he's carrying her over the threshold so that she can die in the house and be with her daughter. And I don't know if he killed himself, what Mr. Dudley did. We don't see that. But it is meant to be a sort of a happy ending. It's fucked up because they're stuck in this place that fed off of their family, but also they do get to be together in a way. It's not perfect, but it is what it is. And I don't know, it's just such an odd, there's something very sweet as well as extremely dark about it. And these people, with this hanging over them their whole lives, waiting and hoping that they will be able to get to the house before they die, that moment. And then we have Hugh say goodbye to Steve and walk into the red room with Nellie and his wife. And it's such an odd moment because it's a compromise. His mom is getting somebody to stay with her. Evidently, this means that the house will let the rest of them go, I guess. I don't know, about the hauntings that everybody else has been coping with, whether they are going to still have those. We have the tall bowler hat man that Steve faces down with on the way in. So creepy. I do not understand why that guy is so tall. I don't get the significance of that at all. If anybody wants to tell me, feel free. But Steve walks out of the house and all of the ghosts are there in a moment that's just, I don't know what Steve is feeling at this time, but I would be sprinting and screaming, thank you very much. And one of the guys in the background of that scene has the bowler hat on and a cane, but he's not the super tall guy. He is a regular height. So I don't know if that's meant to imply that that guy got transformed somehow by what happened. I don't know. But everything ends with them all coming to terms with the various things. We have Steve talking to his wife, Shirley talking to her husband. We have Theo packing up the guest house and moving out. Apparently, maybe moving in with Trish, but maybe not. And she takes her gloves off and leaves them, which I don't know if that's meant to be that her ability has gone away or what. And then the final scenes are the Dudleys, Luke celebrating his 2 years, and then the slow camera pan through the house with the final words of the episode of whatever walked there walked together. All those who walked there walked together, which is a definite change from whatever walked there walked alone. So, yeah, I found it very satisfying. I really, really have to wrap up here. I am so over time. But thank you all very much for joining me. Thank you again very much to Candace for commissioning this episode. I wish that I had more time to talk about it because I have more to say, to be honest. But what can you do? And I really appreciate y'all helping me out through those live watches too, because it was very difficult. So everyone, this draws to a close. I appreciate you all. I love you all. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.